Ended up last time starting to talk about Sparta. Right next to Sparta was a very fertile plain called Messenia. Oh yeah, Messenia. And the Spartans conquered the Messenians in spite of the fact that Messenia had a larger population. The Spartans made the Messenians into semi-slaves, which are called helots. Again, they were Messenian slaves. And the Spartans were to hold on to these helot slaves for, I guess, 400 or 500 years. It was one generation of Messenians after another were enslaved. Messenia would revolt from time to time, and they would lose. But inevitably, what happened? The Spartan population continued to decline, and the Messenian population increased. And then one day, but I'm jumping ahead of the story, but one day Messenia revolted, and Sparta had to come to terms with them. The Spartans couldn't fight. But I'm jumping ahead of the story a little bit. But essentially, Messenia provided the food that the Spartans ate, while the Spartans set themselves up in a big military camp, and they did nothing but soldier. They discouraged any form of philosophy, any form of travel. They did not allow foreign visitors, or did not like foreign visitors to come in. Essentially, they were setting up a military state, and the person was sending army from the time he was born to the time he died. The Spartan lawgiver is a man named Lycurgus. Now, folk, we're not sure if Lycurgus ever existed. The same thing can be said for Zoroaster, and there have been persons who have said that they even doubt that Jesus existed. But the Spartans said that Lycurgus was the one who had laid down the laws that they followed for several hundred years. And under the Lycurgan system, anyone who was weak was cast out. If its baby appeared to be weak, whether it be a male or female child, he or she was not allowed to grow up. They only wanted strong women to produce strong men. The result of this was they became practically extinct. I told you last time the boys were taken from mother's age of 7. I told you it was the age of 6. Your book says the age of 7. Might depend on the generation, or maybe, what difference does it make? But anyway, from the time they were what we might call first graders or second graders, they were placed in barracks and under complete control of the state. And they were given harsh discipline that included a whole lot of whippings. When a Spartan man turned 30, he was allowed to vote, but they only voted on lesser matters. He was allowed to sit in the assembly and even live at home. He no longer had to live in the barracks, but live at home. And again, because they're young men, might get married at 20 or 22 or 23, but they were not allowed to live with their wives until they turned 30. This contributed to the Spartan population declining. Now, it's known that a lot of Spartan men probably sneaked off and went home and spent the night at home, but nevertheless, the Spartan population continued to decline, and this inevitably led to their extinction. The Spartan women did engage in athletic activities, and they engaged in them. Your book says nude. I have also read that they were expected to dance in front of the town, completely nude also. The purpose being to desensitize them, to make them toughened up, to harden them, because when their husbands were at war, they were expected to not mourn if their husbands were killed in battle. And more than one Spartan woman is known to have, when her husband died, just took it very stoically, no tears shed, no grief expressed, because grief was looked on as being a sign of weakness. Now, again, let me hasten to state, I'm not trying to convince you of any of this stuff myself, but that I'm teaching about it only, not that I'm trying to convince you that this is the right way. I mean, during World War II, General Patton jumped all over a soldier, kicked him actually because he was crying. He said, "Real men don't cry." Well, General Patton was disciplined harshly for this and taken relief of command for a while. They asked Norman Schwarzkopf after the Gulf War in 1990, "Do soldiers cry?" He said, "Yes, soldiers cry." Robert E. Lee did, and he named several famous soldiers who were known to have shed tears. It's not a sign of weakness, but the Spartans looked on it as being a sign of weakness. Now, Sparta is known to have never had any kind of a military takeover. Their people never rebelled. However, I must state the Messenians rebelled often, and eventually the rebellion was a success. Sparta contributed greatly to the Greek victory in the first Persian War. And then after that, they just simply would not take part in the other wars against Greece. And even Philip of Macedon and Alexander the Great left them alone. Alexander said, "I'm the conqueror of all of Greece except Sparta." Left them alone. And essentially, they just simply died out and became extinct. All right. Moving on from Sparta to Athens. In the mountains of Greece, one mountaintop, there are 200 people who claim to be descended from the Spartans. The city of Sparta itself is nothing but ruins. Sheep and goats graze among the stone ruins. In contrast, Athens is a city of at least 2 million people. Athens is located on the peninsula of Attica. Well, actually, it's all the peninsula of Attica, but it's actually located near a big gulf, which means it's located on the sea, located on a harbor. Harbor is the word I was trying to think of. And therefore, it was ideally suited for trade, commerce. Now, when history starts, when our historical records start with Athens, they were facing political turmoil. We don't know all the reasons for the turmoil, and we don't know what laws were enforced at the time. If you read a more detailed history, they will say that the laws were draconian, that the laws have been set forth by Draco. And draconian laws are said to have been so strict that if a person were caught stealing a loaf of bread, he probably would be killed. We don't know for sure if all this is true. Again, it's difficult to tell because they didn't start their written records till about 600 or so BCE. So what happened before that is conjecture. But at the time the written records start, you might say at the time the light of history turns on, they were in turmoil. Farmers were finding themselves unable to pay their debts, and they were being sold into slavery. They would take out loans and pledge, if I can't pay the loan, I'll become your slave. Then when they couldn't pay, they were sold into slavery. So they used themselves as collateral. Now when I say take out loans, there were no banks. So they'd borrow from their rich aristocratic neighbors. And the result was chaos and turmoil and trouble. This takes us up to the first of Athens' great statesmen, Solon. Solon was made archon in about 594 BCE, early in the 6th century BCE. And because the situation was so dire, he was given full authority to do whatever he felt needed to be done. Now, folk, again, now we can't be sure, but it appears that Athens had been experimenting with democracy before Solon. And then when things really got out of hand, they picked one man and said, hey, you're wise enough, smart enough, you figure this thing out and you solve it, we'll give you absolute authority. This is dangerous. The Germans did the same thing with Adolf Hitler. During a time of turmoil called the Great Depression of the 30s, they gave Hitler absolute authority. But in the case of Solon, he turned out to be a much better man. He made some reforms, but his reforms did not satisfy either side. They were a compromise. So you know, compromise, each side gives in a little bit. He outlawed the use of collateral for loans. So he outlawed people to use themselves or their families as collateral. In other words, if I can't pay this debt, I'll give you my son to be your slave. If I can't pay this debt, I'll give you 2 of my daughters to be your slaves. So Solon outlawed that. But this did not eliminate the power of the aristocracy. It did open the door for a few more democratic reforms. One thing he didn't do, he outlawed collateral, and he said that persons who owed money could not be enslaved. And again, this made the common people happy. But what didn't make the common people happy, he did not redistribute lands and give them to the poor. Redistribution. Now, maybe he was a wise man beyond his time. But I want to tell you that, folks, there have been many a time in history when great rulers have appeared up and they have taken lands from the rich. They say that the rich do not need all these lands, and redistributed these lands somewhat equally among the poor, just giving land outright to the poor. And in every case, it has not worked. It's difficult to explain why. One thing that happens is oftentimes the poor who never earned the land in the first place do not know how to manage. And they quickly over-speculate or over-plow or fall into poverty rather quickly and wind up losing the land. Hey, just south of our own border in Mexico, a Mexican president did that not too long ago, redistributed lands, and the result was, instead of poverty decreasing, poverty actually became worse. We'll talk about Korea tried this. Folk, everywhere where it's been tried, several monarchs have tried it. Take the lands from the rich that they don't need, take wealth from the rich and redistribute it among the poor. It destroys incentive. It does not work. Another word for this is socialism. And we're doing the same thing right now. Solon didn't. Again, this upset a lot of folk. Solon's reforms did not solve all the problems, and in fact, like so many great men, Solon was not even liked while he was in power. But then he retired from power, and after he left office, the people looked back on him and said, what wonderful times we had through him. He was such a wise, capable man. He eliminated slavery, the debtor's enslavement. And the rich was glad he did not take away a lot of their lands and give to the poor. I want to insert this about the rich. You might think the rich are snakes. I attended a snake show one time where the man said, we're going to eliminate snakes someday, but we're going to miss them when they're all gone. As much as we hate them, they do us more good than we realize. And when they're gone, the rodents will multiply and take over. And we'll wish we had the snakes back because the snakes are better for us than the rodents. It may not sound like a pleasant thing to talk about, because between the automobile and persons who feel like every time they see a snake, the first thing they do is kill it, we're eventually going to run out of them or eliminate them. The way I feel about the rich folk, the richer the rich get, the richer I'll get. Let them get rich. Take the money from them and hey, guess what? They can't hire me anymore. I'll grow poorer. The more you impoverish the rich, the poorer we all get. Does it make sense? I mean, if you study economics, it's just fundamental economics. Let your more enterprising people, and maybe even sometimes your less scrupulous people, forge ahead. And eventually they'll have to hire some of us, and eventually they'll find ways to spend that money they've got, which will force other people to hire. So the richer the rich get, the richer we all get. Let them forge ahead. Hey, I've heard in Latin America there's a certain kind of crab, if you put one of them in a basket, you'll fall out. But the natives just put dozens of them in a basket, and none of them fall out. When one starts to get ahead, the rest of them pull them down. That's what socialism does.